What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing something just a little bit different because we're not just talking exploits, we're ranking exploits. We're gonna look back at some of the most infamous, the most game-breaking, the downright degenerate exploits in WoW history, and we're gonna put them on a tier list too. We're talking about exploits that shattered economies, that made a mockery of leveling, and forced Blizzard GMs to slam down that ban hammer. From the S-tier game shatterers to the C-tier clever tricks, we're ranking these on one thing and one thing only: how badly they broke the game. Let's get into it. Alright, so starting at the bottom in our C-tier, these are not bad exploits, not at all. They're just highly specific, or required such an insane amount of effort that they just really couldn't be abused by the masses. They're more like mind-blowing achievements than actual game threats. Our C-tier example coming up is a perfect example of that. Leveling in Classic WoW, it can infamously take hundreds of hours, unless you pay Vladimir on 2G, but what if you could level to 60 in just a couple of minutes? Especially if you were skipping the most painful levels, the 45 to 60 range. Well, streamer Zeroji, he actually wanted to answer that question. His method was simple, genius, even lucrative. It revolved all around a quest in the Blasted Lands called Kumisha's Endeavors. All Zeroji needed to do was simply farm spheres from Teramis the Devourer. Turn those in and he'd get 5,600 experience and an emerald-encrusted chest full of valuable blues. But going from 45 to 60 in just 31 minutes, it required a staggering 480 Teramis spheres. That easily makes this one of the most mind-blowing leveling achievements that has ever happened in WoW history. It also shows that there are still new ways you can actually level faster than ever in Classic. Zeroji's run was legend, wait for it, dairy, but let's be real. Farming Teramis on every single layer for months and months and months for stockpiled tiny bits of experience, it's a dedication that most of us just don't have. It's an incredible personal achievement, but it's not going to break the leveling meta, and it's not going to require a Blizzard patch. Still, a solid, a respectable C-tier entry. Moving up to the B-tier though, these are the exploits that provided a major advantage. They were clever, they were powerful, and absolutely abused by those in the know. They definitely broke the game, but in a more contained way than the legends higher up on the list. First up in the B tier, we have two of the most famous world-first leveling races. Both were won by some cheeky tactics. Would you trade a ban in World of Warcraft in exchange for world-first level 80? See, WoW in 2008, it just hit different. So when the best paladin in the entire world wanted to get level 80 world first, the stakes were high in Wrath. Athene's plan, it was actually pretty simple. You take 5 of the best geared, best TBC players in the game, full flasks, full consumes, full mana pots. Then you just spam Utgard Keep as you'll Nerupt from 70 all the way to 80. Except Athene had a trick up his sleeve: mob tagging. See, if a 5-man group killed mobs in a dungeon, the XP would be split 5 ways. But if you tagged a mob in a dungeon back then, and you dropped group, well, you would get the majority of the experience from the mob, even if everybody else helped kill it. So Athene's group, they'd kick their tank Darius, they'd let him tag absolutely everything in the dungeon, they'd AoE the mobs down, they'd re-invite him, heal him up, buff him up, the end result being level 70 to level 80 in just 13 hours. While Blizzard had definitely given the all clear to similar strategies in the past, perhaps they just couldn't stomach the idea of someone breaking Wrath of the Lich King leveling this badly. After all, 11 million players were looking at Athene, so if he was doing it, why shouldn't they? So right as Darius and Athene's group were about to ding him level 80, a GM named Kalordian, he shows up and said, "Yep, you're banned." For many players, especially Athene, the big takeaway was this: if you find an insanely awesome broken exploit or a crazy leveling method, and Blizzard doesn't like it, be careful, because they might just ban you. Same concept 14 years later. Wrath of the Lich King Classic World First Race. The stakes are high. But as is tradition with Athene's mob tagging escapades, the World First was technically won by somebody doing a pretty huge exploit. See, Twitch streamer Now, he had a secret weapon, and that weapon was the NPC Rokir in Icecrown. Rokir would periodically summon zombie mobs, and as long as you did 1 point of damage to them, they would eventually disappear and give you full experience. The result for Now was 1.8 million experience per hour and level 80 in just 8 hours. Both Athene and Now used NPC exploits to rocket to World First, and one of these resulted in a very famous ban. While the methods were undeniably powerful and completely unintended by Blizzard, outside of the World First racers, they really didn't affect the wider player base. That means it kept them from being truly server-wide and game-wide disasters. That also means they earned their spot on the B tier. Next up in the B tier, though, is an exploit that wasn't about a bug specifically. It was about widespread collusion on a massive, massive scale. If you wanted to make thousands of gold in the early days of Classic WoW, well, Devil Star farming was really the way to go. Devil Stars in Un'Goro, they could be skinned for leathers, and those Devil Star sets for hunters, for the rogues, were a ticket to hundreds of gold in the early months of Classic. The problem, though, is that the Un'Goro farms were highly contested, with dozens of noobs and pros alike aiming to farm their leathers for their own sets and for huge auction house profits. A game-breaking solution quickly formed. Cross-faction coalitions of top guilds, think Apes for example, working together to clear Un'Goro Crater of any and all competition. The Devil Star Mafia, it didn't just break code, it broke the economy for a key market through sheer force and organization. It was game-breaking, absolutely, for anybody trying to farm their prebis, but it was also a player-made problem. It's not technically a bug, but it is a perfect fit for the B tier. Now though, we're getting into the big leagues, the A tier. These exploits were seriously broken. They caused chaos, created huge gaps between players, and forced Blizzard to step in. Our very first entry is one of the most terrifying things that could ever happen to a player. Getting scammed out of all of your gold instantly. What if you could send the richest player you knew a Wikara, and within seconds, all of their gold would be in your account without any recourse, no ban? Well, I'm not making that up. Arguably the most famous, the most lucrative, and the most toxic scam that has ever happened involved a malicious Wikara that would instantly send all of your gold away to the scammer. In this case, we had streamer Dragonout. He'd been boosting Stratholme for months with his best friend Orbalisk. They had made tens of thousands of gold, probably 50, 60,000. Dragonout gets done with a long night of Nax raiding, and you know how that fries your brain, right? So he just gets out of this raid, and somebody named Orbsbank invites him to a group. Naturally, with his fried brain, he assumes that's Orbalisk. So when Orbsbank shares a Wikara that says Strat Booster, Dragonout naturally trusts him. He installs it, he turns it on. The very second he goes to the mailbox, though, instantly, with no warning, all of his 29,000 gold is sent directly away to the scammer. This is an absolute A-tier entry, because it breaks something far more important than just the economy. It completely breaks players' trust in the game, their safety. Losing 29,000 gold in just one click. It is absolutely devastating. A truly nasty, nasty exploit that we have likely not heard the last of. Next in the A tier, we have an economic disaster. What if Blizzard released a patch for WoW and the vendors suddenly sold items like Chrono Boons for 1/20th of the price? Well, that actually happened. That means for a window of about 45 minutes, you could buy a highly desired item for 20 silver that was actually worth 10 gold. What happened that day is that Blizzard inadvertently turned on the battlegrounds for Classic Anniversary and connected them to Season of Discovery. What took place after that was an absolutely insane bloodbath of epic proportions. But it also meant that Classic players, for a brief moment, could access the Season of Discovery vendors. Players like Chet Steele on Reddit made 700 gold in just minutes, and the entire player base went into a chrono boon buying frenzy. This exploit, it rained gold on anybody and everybody who was lucky enough to be logged in at that exact moment. The craziest part, people really did profit from this, nobody was ever punished, and the only thing really keeping it from being in the S tier is that the exploit was simply done in a matter of minutes. Still, pure economic chaos and absolutely A tier. Rounding out our A tier, we have an exploit that defined the first 2 weeks of Classic. See, with Classic WoW, Blizzard likely envisioned players questing, playing with their friends, taking it chill. But they never would have expected that most players would sprint to dungeons, lock themselves in there, and grind all the way to level 60. Except that's exactly what happened. The single best way to level in Classic, for at least the first 2 weeks, was simply to lock yourself in dungeons with 10 players, not just 5, pull everything, AoE it down, and repeat, and then repeat, and repeat. See, dungeons like Scarlet Monastery, Zul'Farrak, they actually allow for 10 players to be inside all at once. That wouldn't have been a problem, except that there is supposed to be a huge XP penalty for having a raid in a dungeon like this. The problem was, when Blizzard implemented dungeons and implemented Classic, they forgot to put the XP penalty in. So basically, if you weren't leveling in dungeons in a 10-man group the first weeks of Classic, you were drastically falling behind. It was so effective that it completely changed the leveling meta overnight, creating a massive gap between the exploiters and everybody else. A definite A-tier exploit. And here we are, the top of the list, S-tier, the god tier of exploits. These don't just break the game, they shatter its very foundation. These are the exploits that threaten to ruin entire servers and force Blizzard to bring the hammer down hard. Our first S-tier exploit is an infinite gold and XP printing machine. When Classic first came out, the idea of getting over 100,000 experience, 200 gold per hour at the exact same time, it would have been laughable. But a random exploit involving an obscure quest from Commander Gorshak and BRD, it changed the game. The first of its kind, the best leveling and the best gold making spot at the exact same time. This quest was called What's Going On, and the idea was, every time you talk to Commander Gorshak, a bunch of mobs would run into his prison cell, you killed him, and then you saved him and turned the quest in. Except people figured out, if you started the waves of mobs, abandoned the quest, then you could literally do it over and over and over again. Waves of mobs would run in, you'd AoE them down in 2 seconds, you'd start the quest again, more waves would come in, and you'd be getting items like Edge Masters, Librams of Veracity. Really, you'd be getting them as fast as you could loot them. Now, fast forward about 6 months, Blizzard finally patches the Gorshak farming in June of 2020. Now, one likely theory of why they patched it is that the Alliance didn't have an equivalent spot. The quest was completely unfair and gave Horde a huge economic advantage. The more likely reason, though, is that Gorshak farming was a botter's paradise. See, having a spot that was so lucrative inside of an instance, where you could generate tens and tens of thousands of gold, completely hidden away from anybody ever reporting you, it was a recipe for disaster. Infinite XP, infinite gold, safely inside an instance. Abused by legit players, but especially botters, for months and months. It was a disaster for game integrity, and an absolute S-tier pick. Next up, an exploit that threatened to make dungeon farming and classic rare items completely pointless. What if you could farm Hand of Justice in minutes? Well, in 2019 Classic, the layer technology actually allowed that to happen, at least for a brief moment. All you had to do was clear the dungeon you were in up to the spot where you had the mob you wanted to farm. Then you dropped group, you layer hopped, and you re-invited your group back. Just like that, all of the mobs in the entire dungeon would fully respawn. This was really a fundamental breakdown of how the game world was actually supposed to work. Farming dungeon bosses without clearing the dungeon? It threatened to completely trivialize the entire pre-raid BIS grind. Blizzard had to come down really hard with this one, giving out months-long suspensions, removing items, and proving just how game-breaking and serious this really was. S tier without a doubt. And finally, the number one spot. The most legendary, the most game-breaking, the most awe-inspiring exploit in WoW history. See, one of the most famous concepts in vanilla WoW is something called wreck bombing. Reckoning is a buff that stacks up. Anytime you get critically hit, you get a bonus attack. In Classic, it's up to 4 attacks, and just with that, you could absolutely one-shot a mage, for example, in 1 second. But imagine original vanilla WoW, where you could stack 100, 500 Reckoning stacks. But hold on to that for a second, because back in vanilla WoW, world bosses were f***ing epic, and no world boss was more epic than Doomlord Kha'Zix himself. Sure, he dropped the craziest and best loot in the game, like the epic Imperium Demolisher, but he was also absolutely terrifying. Any death you had against him would lead to a snowball effect, where that would wipe your entire guild off the face of the earth. So imagine, the Ret Paladin Karmer, he builds up 1800 Reckoning stacks, he bubbles, he runs into Kha'Zix that one single time he makes that attack, his game freezes, Kha'Zix starts dropping health, and when he comes back, boom, he's dead on the floor, but next to him is Kha'Zix himself, dead on the ground. Yeah, Reckoning was patched within hours of that, but the legacy of Karmer and Wreck Bombs, it lives on even today. One-shotting a world boss, it doesn't get more game-breaking than that. This is the stuff we dream of, the stuff of legends. An exploit so powerful, it inspired actual Hearthstone cards, and was hotfixed almost immediately. The Wreck Bomb, it's not just S tier, it's in a tier of its own. And that's my list. What did I get right? What did I get horribly wrong? Let me know in the comments and tell me, what is your S tier exploit? Would love to hear it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more content, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.